Yeah, guys, so we are live. I think Sundaram, you can start.
Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing good. We may have new members join this event today. So, I would like to share about our ng-keralam community. ng-keralam is a community to share and gain knowledge on Angular. This is our second meetup, and we are organizing it to do every month and mostly one meetup per month. This month, we have two awesome speakers, Siddharth and Udhay. First of all, thank you guys for accepting to be a part of this ng-keralam. Uh,
Thank you, Sundaram. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for inviting us.
Pleasure,
yeah.
pleasure. So let me
Thank
give
you
you a
so
small
much.
introduction about our speakers today. So Siddharth, he is an IT analyst, and he also marked his step in Angular community and became GDE in Angular. He is also organizer of NG Girls community. The community is focused to introduce more women to the world of technology and increase diversity. Thanks Sid, for the initiative. Next, we have Udhay. Professionally, he is a full stack engineer, and has his own meetup group called Angular Hive. He also does many meetups every month, and you can check out uh, his meetup link. We will be showing in this description. Thanks, Uday, for
Th-
contributing to the Angular community. Once
Thanks,
again,
Sundaram.
thanks, and
Yeah,
Uday, thank you, Uday, for accepting the initiative. Okay,
no
so
problem.
first session will be handled by Sid, and over to you, Sid.
Okay, thank you so much, Sundaram, for giving us the platform to speak. I'll just quickly share my screen and then let's start. Okay, so hopefully everybody is now able to see my screen. Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Sid. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll be talking about the present and the future of Angular with Ivy. And let me just start my stopwatch. Okay, so what exactly is Ivy? First of all, Ivy is the third generation of compilation and rendering pipeline in Angular. The previous two generations were called the template compiler and the view engine. Now, both these rendering engines had a few issues in place, and so Ivy was some sort of an initiative by the Angular team in order to make things better. Ivy is also an enabler. Now, when the Angular team started to work on Ivy, they had a few design goals in mind, and they wanted to make it better in terms of optimizability, incrementality, and flexibility. Now, we can already see a lot of the improvements when Angular 9 released, and a lot of these improvements were around bundle size. So, the whole framework is now, which was initially a very large sort of a switch statement, has now been broken down into more smaller and granular instructions. And how this works is that you have your Angular code. Okay, sorry about this. Yeah, so you have your Angular code, and once you compile your Angular code, it gets compiled, and internally it calls a lot of these instructions, as you can see here, like the element start, text, and stuff like that. And all these are IV instructions, so the granular instructions that I was talking about in the previous slide. Now, the whole framework has now been broken down into more smaller instructions like these. And how this helps is that once your application gets compiled, the application code that gets generated is directly calling these functions from the framework. And so how this is helpful is that the rest of the framework code, the basically the instructions that you're not really using in your code, can now be tree shaked off, which is great. So apart from that, the whole rendering engine has been broken down into many such instructions, which are IV instructions. So there are IV instructions for quite a lot of features that you use from Angular, like the DOM creation, content projection, queries, dependency injection, pipes, SVG, internationalization, etc. Another thing is that if you use to run the Angular compiler, which is this ngc command, and you try to run it with the view engine, which was the previous generation of the compilation and rendering pipeline in Angular. It used to generate quite a lot of files for a component. For example, it used to generate this metadata.json file and this ng summary file and the ng factory file and a lot of these other files. With Ivy, if you run this ngc command again, it would generate just one file, which is this component.js file, which has all the information that Angular needs in order to render the component and then detect changes at runtime. And so instead of generating all these 4 files, it now generates just one file, and that is just it. So once we are able to also tree shake a lot of the Angular code and we don't generate these metadata files, it eventually results in smaller bundle sizes. So these are a few reasons for those smaller bundle sizes. Another thing is about locality. So how locality works in Angular is that now, prior to Angular Ivy, if you used to, let's say, inject or use uh, a decorator like a directive like ngif, a structural directive, then it used to also include somehow the view container ref or template ref, which are the dependencies that ngif needs in order to generate itself. So what you're seeing here, which is the generated code for the Angular component, is that if it uses ngif, then we also see the implementation detail leakage of ngif in the generated code. And this is definitely not good, because if something changes in the app component, then we'll also have to check if ng-if was changed or not, because we have this implementation detail leakage. So this is something that you will be seeing in the definition of ng-if right here. Now with Ivy, things have changed a bit. So here as well, we use ng-if somewhere, but we don't really see the instances of the view container ref or template ref being used in the generated code. And how this is useful is that now if something changes in the app component, then it won't probably trigger a global set of compilation in order to also cater for the changes that you made inside the app component. And this has happened with the help of a lot of these static fields that has been added to the component class because of the Ivy compiler. So what Ivy compiler does is it calls specific Ivy instructions for specific building blocks in an Angular application. Like if you try to compile a component with it, then it will somehow generate the theta cmp static field, and the static field is something that gets generated because of a call to the theta define component Ivy instruction, as you can see right here. So in this specific line, it attaches the theta fec and the theta cmp static fields on the app component class, and then it somehow is enough for the Angular in order to understand that what's going on here, how this particular component can be instantiated, how it can be rendered, and how changes can be detected on this component. Now I'll be also going through this example in detail in a later section, so please bear with me till that point. Now, a lot of these things I've talked about so far in the last 6 minutes or so is something that I've talked a lot more in depth in a talk that I gave last year at NG Sri Lanka. So please feel free to check this out in order to understand what was the rationale behind rewriting the whole compilation and rendering pipeline in Angular. And again, coming back to the design goals, I shortly summarized the optimizability and incrementality part of the whole thing. But in this talk, I'll be focusing more on the flexibility part of it. And I'll be doing that with the help of a few examples so that it also makes sense. All right. So before that, Ellarkum Swagatam. My name is Siddharth Ajmeera, and I'm a full stack JavaScript developer based out in Sydney, Australia. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular, and I write tech articles from time to time for this publication that's named Angular In Depth, or now indepth.dev. And I also have courses about Angular and Firebase on platforms like PactPub and Udemy. And just in case you have any issues with Angular and you want some help, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. This is my Twitter handle, and I'll try to help you out in any way possible. All right. So I've divided this talk into two segments. In the first section, I talk about the present, that is the things that you can do with Ivy as of today. And the things, and in the second segment, I will be talking about the things that you will be able to do with Ivy in the near future. All right, so let's start with the present. The first example that I'm going to demonstrate is lazily loading a component. So how exactly do we do that with Ivy today? Also, one thing that you'll have to note down here is that lazily loading a component is something that was only possible with Angular 9. That's when Ivy was used by default in Angular. It wasn't really possible before that using a simpler approach. So with Ivy, how exactly does it work? Well, let's have this example wherein I have an app module, and in this app module, you will see a few components, a directive, and a pipe. Then there's this app component, and inside this app component, there is some code. We will be discussing about what that is, and then there is a very simple template. Now, what I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to load the GIF component here as a dynamically loaded component, and this is something that will be loaded on demand. So you'll see that there's this GIF component, and this GIF component isn't really present inside the app module inside the declarations array. So since it is not really present inside the declarations array, and I also don't have an import uh, for this component, it will be created as a separate chunk, and then it would be downloaded only on demand. So how exactly do we download it? Well, we have a button here. This button calls a function, and then it loads that GIF component on demand, and then it hosts it or renders it onto a host. This is the host here. Now, this host is a very simple div right here that I'm trying to access using a template variable. So I've assigned a template variable named host for lazy component to this div. And then inside the app component, let me just open this side by side so that it is a bit more clear. Okay, now here's this div that I'm talking about. I'm referring to this div using the view child decorator, and I'm passing the name of this div, the template variable name, right inside here for the selector property. And then we also know that we have the, in case of the view child, we can also pass it this options array and then pass additional fields like the read and static fields. So I pass in the read because I wanted to read the view container ref for this host. And then I also pass static as true because here we are dealing with dynamic components and we need to somehow evaluate these components at runtime. So with that, I'm assigning a variable or a property on this app component class, which is the view container ref. And since I'm reading the view container ref because of this read property, I'll also get something which is of type view container ref. All right, so far so good. Now I've also injected the component factory resolver on this component, and this component factory resolver is something that I import from Angular core. Now let's talk about this button here. So as soon as I click on this button, it calls the load GIF lazily method. What this load GIF lazily method does is it is an async function. Now I've created it as an async function because I'm calling a dynamic import statement in here. So this is our dynamic import statement which loads the GIF component. So it is present right in parallel to the app component right here. So this is our app component and this is our GIF component. Okay. So I call the dynamic import statement. Now the dynamic import statement is something that returns to us a promise. So in order to not write it in the fashion that this would return a promise, then I'll call a then method on it and then pass it a callback method. I simply use the await keyword, and then use it with the import with the dynamic import statement. And since I'm using the await keyword, I'll also have to declare the method as async. So I use that. So this is hence an async function. Now, the dynamic import statement would give me a JavaScript module on the top of which I will be just destructuring the GIF component. And once I have the GIF component, then I can pass it to the component factory resolver.resolve component factory method and pass it the GIF component. That's exactly what I'm doing here. Now, this method is going to return to me the component factory. And then once I get the component factory, then I can pass that component factory to the view container refs create component method as an argument. So again, this view container ref here is this property on the app component class that we have created. And once I call that, it is going to create the component for me, and then I will get an object inside which that inside that object I will be getting an instance property which I'm destructuring right here, and then I'm creating an alias for that instance property as component instance. Once I get that component instance, let's open up the GIF component. So this GIF component also has an input property which is called GIF source. So I can have access to that GIF source, and then I can assign a value to it. So that's exactly what I'm doing on line 33 and 34. As simple as that. So if I go back to the application that I have, you'll see that there's a load GIF button, and this is the button that we have here inside the app component. So how exactly does this work is, as soon as I click on the button, it would create a separate network request in order to download the chunk for the component, which is the GIF component that we are trying to load using this dynamic import statement right here. And once it does, then it would do all these things like resolve the component factory and then create the component and then render it onto the UI. So you'll see that there's a network request going on here. I'll just clear everything out. And if I click on load GIF, you'll see that this request for this GIF component gets fired, it gets downloaded, and then it gets rendered onto the UI. Okay, so that is the first demo of loading the component lazily. And this is also very beneficial because if you have a lot of components and then you're not really using all these components, then it doesn't really make sense to make it as a part of the main bundle that gets loaded initially. So you can improve the load time of your application by by lazily loading these components and only downloading them or requesting for them on demand once the user does it. Okay, so that's the first example. The second example is about an ng object. So let's say that you had this application and then you wanted to somehow make some changes to this component, let's say, and wanted to see how this component reacts to those changes at runtime. So how exactly will you do that? Well, you have this element selector, which you can also have access to by clicking on the elements tab, and then you can select specific items here. What happens as soon as you select a specific item is that it gets stored in a global variable that's called $0. So let's say that if I select this GIF component, which is by using the selector app-gif, and I go back to the console and type in $0, press enter, I will have access to that app GIF component that I selected using the element selector right here. How exactly is this useful? Well, there's also this ng property that we have on the window object, and this ng object has a lot of methods that we can call on it. One such method is this get component method. Now the get component method expects an element. So if we pass it an element, then it would give us a reference to a component. And once I have a reference to the component, then I can make some changes to that component, and then I'll have to also apply those changes in order to see them getting reflected onto the UI. So let's try doing that. I'll clear everything. Now again, the GIF component was stored in the theta in the $0 property, right? So I can call ng dot get component method and then pass it $0, which is our element, or which refers to our element that we selected from the element selector. And then I can assign it to a const. Let's call this GIF component, and let's press enter. Now, if I try to log what we have in the GIF component, I'll see that it has a few things like the GIF source, which was the input property, along with a few element refs, which I just have for reference purposes that I'm reading via the view child decorator. Okay, now let's say if I wanted to change the source of this GIF from the one that we currently have to this new source that I'm copying from the UI. So I'll type in GIF component dot GIF source is equal to this URL, press enter. And with that, let's give it some time to see if the changes get applied. Well, the changes are not getting applied right now. And if I open up the ng object once again, I did see something like this apply changes API or method here, and it accepts a component. So maybe I need to pass it the component so that it can apply those changes, sort of detect changes, and then get them reflected over here. So I'll do just that. I'll just type in, let me just hide this, and I'll type in ng dot apply changes, and then I'll pass it the GIF component. And as soon as I press enter, let's see if the GIF changes. I press enter and the GIF changes. Now, how this is useful is that if you want to make some changes to an input property or any specific property that has been exposed on a component, then you can do that with the help of this ng object and apply changes in order to see how that reacts to those changes. All right, now enough talk about the present. Let's now talk about the future. So again, I'll be demonstrating this with the help of a few examples. Now, right before we started, I was just having a very quick discussion with the organizers, and as well as with my fellow speaker Udhay, and I was just asking why exactly, or how, what exactly is the scene of these frameworks out there in their specific region. And what he told me is that a lot of people complain that Angular has a lot of learning curve, and there are quite a lot of APIs that you have to know in order to make yourself comfortable with Angular. And one such specific aspect or concept about Angular is Angular modules. So let's say that if somebody wanted to just acquire Angular and just wanted to start using it without having the background knowledge of how exactly the Angular modules work and stuff like that, then how exactly can they do it? Because Angular modules are can be considered, especially by someone who is like really new to Angular, as something that's very complex and hard to understand. So what if we could simplify things out a bit for them just by rendering a component without the knowledge of Angular modules? But before I do that, I need to make a statement that Angular modules are linchpins in an Angular application. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, I mean that Angular modules do quite a lot of things implicitly on their own without even letting you know about it, or without even making you have to worry about it. So a lot of these things are things like change detection and dependency injection. But if we want to run Angular components without the help of, or without the need of Angular modules, then these are a few things that we will have to take care of on our own. So with that being said, let's start with an example where we can render an Angular component from scratch without even the need of using Angular modules. Okay, so here's this example. Now in this example, I just have 4 files: the index.html, the index.ts, a package.json, and a style.css file. And in the dependencies section, you can see that I just have 4 dependencies. Initially, I just wanted to download Angular core because that's the only thing that I really need. But then at this moment, the Angular core package also has peer dependencies on RxJS, TSLib, and Zone.js, and that's why these get downloaded. So I just wanted to download the app core, the Angular core as such, but still I end up with three additional dependencies. Now, where exactly am I going with this? You also see a component being loaded over here. This is something that is coming in from a component. But if you compare this with a regular Angular application, then you'll see that a lot of these files are not there. So there's the source folder, then the app folder inside that, then there's assets, environments, index.html, main.ts. The main.ts essentially has this whole logic in order to bootstrap our Angular application. And then there are a lot of these other files like the angular.json browser list and stuff like that. But in our example, I just have 4 files. So I'm not really using any Angular module here. So how exactly am I rendering this component here without the use of Angular modules? Now, you saw in one of the slides prior to this that um, there's this thing called locality in Angular, and what it means is that if Angular has everything that it needs to know about how to create the component, how to render it, and how to detect changes on it, then it doesn't really need anything else in order to render the component, right? So you essentially don't really need Angular modules in order to do that. You can just specify those things on the component, and then Angular would be smart enough to just render it. And that's exactly what we are seeing here. How exactly is this working? Let's check that out. So there's this index.html file wherein I have this IV tag. Now you can think of this IV tag as the host. Now host is something that we have already seen here. So we use host in a different way here in a regular Angular application, but in here with Ivy, I can just use a specific tag, and we will see how this gets used. So let's open up the index.ts file. In the index.ts file, I'm importing quite a lot of things in here. Let me try to make this full screen so that I get more space, and let me just zoom this in a bit so that things are a bit more clear. Okay, so I import quite a lot of these things, but all of these are being imported from Angular core. What are these things? Well, these are the same IV instructions that I was talking about. So there are IV instruction for doing things like creating the DOM, and you can see that using this element start, element and text, and all of these different IV instructions. Now you'll see the theta syntax over here, the theta prefix over all of these. Where exactly is this coming from? Well, this is done specifically by the Angular team so that you can so that it can tell you that these are private APIs. So you should not use these private APIs in production. But apart from that, you can essentially import them like the way that I'm importing. And how exactly am I rendering this component? So this is a very simple component class. Now we already know that everything inside Angular is essentially a TypeScript class, right? So this is that exact same TypeScript class. It has a property named name and a method named toggle name. So the toggle name is just toggling between the name property between two different names, which is Sid and Ivy. Apart from that, it has two static fields. Now these static fields are a bit important information that we need to tell Angular so that it can create an instance of the Ivy component. So that's where the factory function comes into the picture. So this theta FAC static field is exactly that factory function. This factory function is responsible for creating an instance of the Ivy component. Okay. Next up, we have the theta CMP static field. Now, where exactly is this theta CMP static field coming in from? This comes from a call to the define component IV instruction. Now, to the define component IV instruction, we pass a lot of metadata. This metadata has a lot of these things like the type. So the type is basically the token of this component, which is IV component in this case. It has the selector, which is the selector property that we generally pass to the metadata of the at component decorator. It has a few other things like the declarations, variables, constants, but the main thing to note here is this template function. This template function is something that runs in order to render the component initially and to detect changes at runtime. And it does that in two phases. That's where this render flag comes into the picture. So the render flag uh, the tells the template function what exactly was the phase in which this template function was running. So if the value of this is 1, then you can think of it as the initialization phase, and if the value of this is 2, then you can think of it as the change detection phase. And then there is also this context that we get. The context here is the component instance. So again, this template method gets called by Angular when it has to render the component and detect changes at runtime. How exactly does it do that? Um, so again, depending on the render flag, if the value is 1, then we will run some code that can initialize the view of this component. How is the view getting initialized? Well, we are using the similar IV instructions here. Each IV instruction is doing something. So let's say that we had this h1 tag here. How exactly is that h1 tag getting generated? It's getting generated because of the call to the element start IV instruction. So the element start IV instruction, we are telling it that it has to uh, create an h1 tag, and then it has to store it somewhere at the 0th index. Let's say that all these things get stored in an array, and then at a later point we can use these indices in order to make some changes or do something. The second thing is the text node. So inside that h1 tag, we need some text to be shown, and that's something that happens because of this text IV instruction. Again, to this we pass the index of the data structure in which this element is going to get stored, and then we pass it some value, which is context.name in this case, and then we end the element. So you can think of this as start h1 tag, then some text, and then end h1 tag. Similarly, we have a button. So in order to create the button as well, we will be using the element start, and then there would also be a text node for this. So the call to the text IV instruction, and then element end. But apart from the text node inside that button tag, we also need to we also need some sort of a click listener. So that's why I'm using this listener IV instruction, and I need to listen to the click event on this button. And as soon as the user clicks, then I need to call the toggle name method on the component instance that I get inside the context. So this is the exact same method that gets called once the button gets clicked. So far so good. Now that's exactly what this template function is all about. Now I just talked about the initial phase, that is the initialization phase, because the value of render flag is 1. But what about change detection? So in case of change detection, what happens is that we simply advance to a specific node, and then once we have advanced to that specific node, then we can just interpolate something. So that's exactly what is happening here. Now I needed to change the text inside the h1 tag. The text would be present inside the text node, which is present at the first index right here. So that's exactly what is happening on line number 33. So it is getting stored at the first index. So I need to go to the first index, and since I'm just starting, I will just simply advance by 1 because I'm at the 0th index, and then advance 1 is going to advance some sort of a pointer to some sort of a pointer by 1. So that's how this advanced IV instruction comes into the picture. And once we are on that specific text node, then we can simply call the text interpolate 1 IV instruction in order to interpolate the text that we have there. And so that gets changed to hey, and then the context name, whatever the name properties value is at that particular instance. Okay, now we have discussed a lot in detail about this template function, but how exactly is this component getting rendered? The component is getting rendered because of this render component IV instruction. So we call the render component IV instruction, and then we pass it the component definition. This component definition at this point, when I'm calling the render component IV instruction, needs those two static fields, the theta FAC static field, which is this, and the theta CMP static field. Without these, it won't have any idea as to how it has to render the component or detect changes at runtime. But since I already have these two static fields on the IV component, I can just pass this IV component class to the render component IV instruction and then also supply a host to it. The host again needs to be some sort of a tag wherein Angular knows that okay, it can place this specific template that gets generated in the theta CMP static field. So the IV host here again is something that we are getting from this index, which is this one right here. And that's why I'm able to see it. If I need to change it to something else, like let's say host, if I save this, I'll probably get an error, but I'll need to make the exact same change over here as well. So I'll type in host and save. And with that, hopefully I should see the template. Now, so far so good. I'll just click on change name now so that I can see the changes to the name, so that I can also demonstrate that change detection is also taking place. So I'll click on change name. Okay. So I'm clicking on change name button, but the text here is not getting changed. Okay. Now, remember I told that Angular modules are linchpins to an Angular application, and that if we don't use Angular modules, then a lot of the things that Angular modules does implicitly would be something that we will have to do on our own. And change detection is one such thing. But the good thing with IV is that we also have this mark dirty IV instruction. So the mark dirty IV instruction would mark this component as dirty, so that in the next change detection cycle, Angular is able to synchronize the model and view after running the change detection. So in order to call this, I'll just do that right after there has been a change, so that I am in control that when exactly should change detection run. So I can tell that this is where change detection needs to run, because this is where the model of my component changes. So I'll just call mark dirty IV instruction here and pass it the instance of this component which is present inside the this keyword, and I'll save this. And as soon as I do that, once I click on the change name button, it will change the text as well. Great. Now, I'll just give you a few seconds so that you can digest whatever I've told you so far, and then just realize how great this is. Okay, but there is one small issue with this. We were talking about simplifying things, but writing such a template code is not really simple at all, right? Because we are not really used to typing all these things on our own. We are just used to typing the regular HTML markup that we need for a component, and then let Angular take the responsibility of generating the code that can somehow render that markup onto the UI, right? But that's the exact same opposite that's going on in here. We are writing all these template instructions on our own in order to render this component. So how can we simplify these things? Well, um, this is the code that gets generated by the compiler, right? So if we somehow use the Angular compiler here, then I guess it would be able to generate this code for us, and so that we won't have to write all this code on our own. So that's exactly what the second example is all about. In the second example, I'm doing just that. So what exactly am I doing is, this time around I have also added the Angular compiler, because that is something that I really need for this example, and the rest of the things are same. We still have 4 files. We still have that index.html with the host, but this time around I'm not doing a lot of hard work inside the index.ts. You'll also notice the difference by seeing that there are comparatively less number of imports here, and the only import that I'm adding here is that from the Angular compiler, because that's something that I really need. uh, Apart from that, there's this metadata object, and this looks like the exact same metadata object that I use for an Angular uh, decorator, uh, an Angular's component decorator. So it has a selector property, and then it has some template, and the template here is a plain old regular HTML markup. Now, what I'm doing here is that I'm just using the add component decorator and passing it the metadata object. And I have a very simple Ivy component class, and it has just a name property and the change name method. But this time around, I don't have the theta FAC and the theta CMP static fields. So I will be relying on the on the compiler in order to add those static fields to the Ivy component class. So how exactly will this work is, I'll just call the theta compile component Ivy instruction, and then I'll pass it the Ivy component class. And apart from that, I'll also pass in the metadata, and this is the metadata that I'm talking about. So hopefully once I call the compile component Ivy instruction, then it should ideally add those static fields. And then once I have a class that has those static fields in place, then I can again call the render component Ivy instruction, pass it the component class that has those two static fields, and then pass it the host as well. And that's how my component can get created and get rendered onto the UI. And then the change detection would also work. Now, in order to see this in action, let's copy this, and I'll open this application in a new tab. So let's open this up. Now, I've placed two console logs over here so that we can probably try to tap into what exactly we are getting inside this Ivy component before the compilation takes place and after the compilation takes place, so that we can get a better understanding of how things are working here. So let's let this work. I have placed breakpoints as well, because as you can see from the console, I just have something like before compilation and after compilation isn't really giving me much information. So I'll probably have to figure out a different way in order to understand what's the difference. So I'll just run this again, because now I have placed those breakpoints, and hopefully it should break at the first index where I have placed the breakpoint. Now I'll go to the console and I'll try to type in Ivy component, and let's see if it has the theta FAC and the theta CMP static fields. So ideally, if it has those fields, then I should be able to see these in the suggestions, but I'm not seeing this. So that's one of the things that we can that's one of the hints. But let's try to manually type in theta FAC and try to press enter. It says that it's undefined at the moment. Let's try to do the exact same thing with the theta CMP static field. So I'll do that, press enter, and that again is undefined. Okay, now let's step through the code and let the compile component Ivy instruction do its thing. And once the compile component Ivy instruction has done its thing, then let's try to again access the theta CMP. This time around, instead of undefined, I'm getting something here, right? So this is the theta CMP static field. It also has the template function which gets called by Angular, so that it could compile and run our component. And then it also has this theta FAC static field, which is again a factory function, right? So with that, I can be sure that I just need to call the compile component Ivy instruction and pass it the component class along with the metadata, and it would add those two static fields onto my component class so that it can render them. Great, and that's exactly what is happening here. The application is getting the component is getting rendered, and change detection is also working as expected. But again, if you just might forget to call the theta compile component IV instruction and the theta render component IV instruction, then you can do something witty by wrapping both these IV instruction calls uh, inside a decorator. So that's exactly what Uri Sheked did once. So he created a decorator so that he could call the compile component IV instruction. So I added the render component IV instruction as well to it, and then returned the component. Now, since this is a decorator, I will be decorating my component class with it. So I decorate my IV component class with the decorator, which I just created, and I'll just pass it the selector and the template. And with that, I should still see the application getting rendered. Now, this is the sort of code that we are used to using at the moment in Angular. We just use the component decorator, and then we pass it a metadata object like the selector and the template, and then it everything takes care of on its own, right? So we can just do this, and things work out pretty well. Okay, so I just demonstrated two examples here. The next example that I would like to demonstrate is the dynamically loading of a component using the render component IV instruction. So let's see how things get simplified if I just use the render component IV instruction here. So I'll just go to the exact same example here. This time around, I will be loading some other component, which is this IV component here. Now, how exactly do I do it? Is that I have a button here. This button is, let me just comment the upper button out. This button is calling the load IV component lazily method, and there is a host as well. But this time around, I'm not really using a template variable name like the way I used here. I'm just typing the name of the selector that I wanted to load. The name of the selector is loaded via render component here. And you'll also see that it doesn't really matter what the name of the host here is anyway. So I'll just go back to the app component because that's exactly where this load IV component lazily method is present. So this is the method. Uh, the initial line is just the same. So we are calling the dynamic import statement. And since this is going to return to me a promise, I'm awaiting it. And since I'm using await, I also have to wrap this function or declare it as an async function. And so I get this component instance, I get this component using the lazy IV component. And with that, I'm just simply calling the render component IV instruction right now, and then I'm passing it a host. Now we already know how the render component IV instruction works, right? So uh, we get the render component IV instruction here, and then I'll just supply a host, and this is the exact same host that I see right here. And with that, that's pretty much it. You don't really have to call the resolve component factory function and then call the view container refs create component method in order to do things anymore. You just call the render component IV instruction, pass it the component class, and then supply a host, and it's all taken care of by Angular. So now with this, if I go back to the application, I should now see a button here, and let's also navigate to the network, clear everything off. As soon as I click on the button, you will see that a call gets fired in order to load this component, and then it gets rendered in here. Great. So again, things are getting simplified. This I feel is a lot more verbose as compared to just using the render component IV instruction, and things are a bit more simpler now. But let's say that there was this IV component class that had a service injected as a dependency. So here I'm injecting the data service, and then I'm calling that data service inside the ng-on-init lifecycle hook method, and then I'm just piping it so that I take it just once. And then with that, I'm calling the subscribe method on it and passing in a console log so that I could log whatever I get from the service. Let's save this, go back to the application and clear everything off. Click on the button. So this time around as well, I see that the network call is going, but I don't see the component getting rendered here. So that probably is an issue. Let's check the console, and I'm getting an error. And it's saying something like inject must be called from an injection context. So this has something to do with dependency injection. So how exactly can I fix this? Well, the good part about this compile component IV, the render component IV instruction is that apart from the host, you can pass it a few other things. One such thing is the injector. Now the issue we are getting here is that this dynamically generated and rendered component doesn't really have an injector so that it could inject that dependency from. It needs an injector in order to make dependency injection work, right? So it doesn't have the injector at the moment, but I can pass it the injector. So I can pass the injector. Now how will the app component get that injector? Well, injector is again something that I can inject as a dependency. So it might uh, seem intuitive, but this is what I do now. So I pass it the injector and supply the value of this dot injector. This dot injector is something that I inject as a dependency, and I save this now. Go back to the application, and let's go back to the network call. Clear everything off. Clear everything off from the console, and let's see if the component gets rendered now. So I'll click. I'm getting two calls here. The first one is to make that call to download the component, and the second one is that API call that it is doing. And I also see the data getting logged here, right? Great. There are a few other things that you can do. So since this is a dynamically loaded component, you might think that if things like view child, view children, stuff like that would work here. So these things work as well. So let's say that there was this input field here, and I wanted to focus on that input field as soon as this component loaded. So I can do that using the view child decorator. So since this input already is inside the view of this component, I can use the view child decorator and pass it the input as a selector. The input in this case is the template variable name right here. And then that way I will get the input, and I'll be getting it as an element ref. So the element ref would have a native element property on it, and then on that native element property I can call the focus method. So that's exactly what I'm doing on this line, and hopefully this should um, make the component to focus, or this should add a focus on this input field. So let's try doing this. I'll just load. And okay, so I'll just click on this button and see. Okay, so this text field is not getting that focus which it was supposed to. I'm writing the focus logic inside the ng after view init lifecycle hook method. So let's see if these logs are getting called in the first place. That way I'll be able to make sure that the method was called. Okay, so the method itself is not getting called. That's probably one of the issues. Okay. Now the lifecycle hook methods, in case of ng init, it was getting called, but in case of the ng after view init, it's not getting called. Okay, so let's go back to the app component and let's see if there is something that can be done about this. Well, ideally what happens is that it has a few of these properties along with the host and the injector property. And one such property that I can think of is the host features property. Now to the host features property, I can pass in some host features. And one such feature is the lifecycle hooks feature. So this feature right here, this is again something that I can use from the Angular core. So I'll use that feature in order to also call the lifecycle hook methods on that dynamically loaded component. So I'll save this and let's go back to the application. And hopefully this time around, I should see the focus getting applied onto the input. So I'll click on the button and fingers crossed. Perfect. So I now see the focus being applied onto this field, and uh, that's because I can also now see the logs getting printed, right? So this is one of the ways in which you can call the lifecycle hook methods of that dynamically loaded component as well. Great. Now, one last thing that I'd like to quickly show you is that this was one of the questions that was asked in one of my previous talks. That what if one of the components gets loaded already, and then you want to reuse it somehow? It is reusable out of the box. So what I mean by this is that let's say that there was another button right here. And one other thing with this host property is that I can pass in anything as the host. And by anything, I mean literally anything. So I've specified the host here as anything. And in order to make this work for both these hosts, I'll just make this function so that it can accept the value of that host property. So I'll do that. And then this method should be accepting a host which is of type string, and then I can just pass it the host whatever I'm getting from the method. So I'll save this and go back to the application. Now I see two buttons here, and both of these buttons are going to load the exact same component. So let's say that I load the component first using the upper button, and you see that there is a network call going on to download that lazy Ivy component. I'll click on the second button this time, and you'll see that there is no separate call that went out to download the exact same component because it is already been downloaded. The API call still did go because we needed that API call in place in order to download the data, right? So yeah, that was one thing. Now one last thing, I keep saying one last thing, but I promise that this is definitely the last thing. Let's try something here. Instead of subscribing to the function, let's try to use the async pipe instead, because that's more of a convention, and everybody suggests that we should not be manually subscribing. So I'll just be creating a data property here and pass in an observable. This observable, let's say, is of type any at the moment. And then instead of subscribing, I'll just assign whatever we get from the from the get data method into the data dollar property. And then I will just inside a pre tag, I will log whatever I get. So using the string interpolation syntax, I'll first use data, and then I'll pass it through an async pipe, and then I'll pass it through a JSON pipe. And let's save this, go back to the application and see if things work out. So I'll clear everything from the console and clear everything from the network. Let's click on the button, and ideally I should have seen the data getting logged here, on the data getting rendered here onto the UI, but it's not getting rendered and I'm getting an error. So I go to the console and it says that the pipe JSON could not be found. Now I know that JSON is probably a part of the common module, so it should be there, but it's not. So let's check here. There's nothing different. Now the common module is already a part of the browser module, I guess. So it should be there, but I'm getting this error anyways. So let's try to get rid of the JSON pipe from the template, and let's save this. Go back to the application, click on the button to download the component again. And this time around, I'm getting an error that the pipe async could not be found. And that's again a bummer. Okay, so this is something that's probably still not possible here, and now you would be thinking that where exactly am I going with all these examples? Well, uh, I'm taking you into probably a world of Angular wherein things like the Angular module, Zone.js, and RxJS, and all these other things can be optional. Now, one of the challenges that we saw at the moment is that if there is some component that is already created and we want to use it in our component that has been loaded on the fly dynamically, then we are not really able to use it because Angular is not able to make sense of what exactly this component is all about. And in order to fix that, um, Minko had a proposal. So the proposal that he had is that, let's say that there is this component that is using a zippy component, which we have right here, this one. And then this also uses a capitalized pipe, which we have right here. Then I could just add both these things, which you can think of as dependencies in this context, as a depth array. And with that, I should be able to use that without any issues. Now, this is again something that is not implemented in Angular yet, but this is just a proposal. So hopefully we might be able to see this in the near future. Um, but yeah, till then, I guess that was all that I had to share in today's talk. And thank you all so much for listening. And just in case you have any issues or doubts, this is my Twitter handle. So please feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, I guess I'm open to any questions now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good session with a lot of demos. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks
Just
for that. So
okay.
we'll wait for the questions. Like if there are any, we'll just pick it up from the comments.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you want to say about the NG girls, like you can say about it.
Hmm. Great idea.
Yeah.
I totally forgot. So all of you who are watching this webinar, we are organizing um, a workshop for girls in India on the 4th of July. The name of this workshop is NG Girls. Um, you can only attend this workshop as a participant if you identify yourself as a female. So yeah, if you are a girl or a female and you want to participate in this workshop and you want to learn about Angular, this is an Angular fundamentals workshop, so it's only for girls who have no prior experience with Angular, but they do know basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you are one such individual and if you want to join, then please feel free to check this website out. The name is ng-girls.org/India/2020. Um, so yeah, please feel free to apply. There are limited seats, so we are targeting around 250 participants this time. So uh, just in case you want to attend and if you want to learn the fundamentals of Angular, please feel free to apply and participate. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And yeah, so Arjun, like he's
Hmm.
saying anything on Angular 10. Okay, what's new? I think he's expecting.
Okay, what's new? So I'll just again share my screen. So there are quite a few things. There's not much, uh, like not anything that's like groundbreaking or something. Just like the Angular 9 release where we had Ivy. They had made a few improvements as such, but most of them, I guess, can be found on the Angular blog. So there was this article that Stephen wrote. Stephen is the DevRel from the Angular team. So here are all the different features that are there. So yeah, I guess this article would be would be helpful in order to learn more about these updates. But again, apart from the version of TypeScript that they are using and addition of this date range picker, and the stricter settings, which are optional by the way, nothing much has changed. The TypeScript version has been bumped to TypeScript 3.9, and yeah, that is essentially everything.
Yeah, I think
I hope
hopefully
that
that.
answers your question, and Arjun.
Yeah, and also we'll share the blog link in the chat. I think if you want, you can just view it.
Yeah, I can also comment, right?
Yeah, yes. So, and we have a question from Makila. So, do
Mhm.
we need to add any additional packages for Ivy?
Not really. So with Angular 9, it is already by default. It's probably there since Angular 6, but a lot of these things are used internally. But it was used by default as the compilation and rendering pipeline with Angular 9. So yeah, you don't really need anything additional in order for Ivy, because Ivy is, again, you can think of Ivy as, if you consider it. Let me try to give you an analogy, and this is a used analogy. It has been given quite a lot of times. So if you're running a car, right, and then there's this engine in the car, what Angular team has tried to do is they have tried to change the engine while the car is driving. So what I'm trying to say here is that initially, Ivy was still there since Angular 6, I guess, but then a lot of it was internal to the framework, and nothing much was there for you to use. But then people started experimenting with things, and now it is like, there is a lot of stability in there, and it is now being used as the default. So yeah, you will get everything right inside Angular core, and that's exactly what I've tried to do here in one of my examples that I shared, wherein I was where is that example? Yeah, here. So this example wherein I was creating everything from scratch, this uses Angular core, right? So that's the only thing that you need in order to use Ivy, because yeah, I mean, everything is present inside core, and Angular core is already something that you see as a part of the package. So yeah, if you are running a regular Angular application, then you'll already have Ivy.
Okay, I think that answers Akhil's question. So next, we have a question from Raj Shekhar. So for project using lazy loading modules, how to organize the project files and folder? The project uses store services, pipes, forms.
For projects using lazy loading modules, how to organize the project files and folder. How to organize in the sense, I guess, for each specific feature module, you will have you will have one module, and then this module will have its individual uh, things like services, pipes, forms, etc. And then another thing is that you will also have some sort of shared module, but I guess the shared module is something that is now frowned upon. One of the reasons for this is that the shared module tries to cater to all the different things that some of your additional modules would be using, but not all of them, right? But then how this would work is that if, let's say, you create you create, let's say, an Angular material module, right? So app material module, that's something that you might be doing so far, right? So what happens in that case is that there are quite a few modules from the Angular material library that you might be using in some of your Angular modules, but not in all of them, right? But um, if you will compile that, then you'll see that it bloats up your bundle sizes quite a bit. So that's why ideally you should not be doing that. So you should keep things focused in the sense that if there is something that is probably being used in the majority of feature modules, then only you should add it to a part of the to the part of the shared module. But apart from that, yeah, uh, be trying to be as focused as possible helps. So should I split the store to each module, or can I store for the whole application at once? My main.js came 1 MB and I'm working on splitting through lazy loading. Uh, this is okay. I'll have to probably think about it, but I guess splitting the store doesn't or wouldn't make sense in this case. I mean, the store should ideally be like the single source of truth, right? So it should be centralized. But yeah, I guess I'll have to check that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Arun Kumar. Is that possible to load dynamically custom directive like render component?
I've not tried it, but I can certainly try. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it work. So yeah, I haven't really tried this out, Arun. But yeah, I can. I'll just add it to some to-do list sort of a thing. So yeah, I can probably get back to you once I do that. Um, I'm not sure how to get back to you as such. So yeah, I mean, we could probably connect on Twitter or something and then start a discussion over there if that helps.
Yeah. So this is the Twitter handle of Siddharth. Like if you want, you can connect him through this handle. Arun. Yeah, I think so. Those were all the questions, Siddharth. So thank you so much. Thanks for your session.
Thank you so much, Swas.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we had a good technical session. So we will take a break. So we'll play a game actually. So it's a kind of non-technical. It's a kind of riddle game in Kahoot. So let me share my screen.
Is like somebody supposed to win this or something?
Sorry, Sid.
Like if you are playing,
Yeah.
what do the winners get?
It's it's just a relax. It's for just relaxation.
Yeah, but let's maybe raise the stakes and probably if somebody wins, then I can share a promo code to my Angular course on Udemy if that helps.
Oh, that would be awesome actually. Okay, so let's see. I think we have around 8 watching live, I guess. So
Okay.
let me hide this banner. Um, so let me to Kahoot. So guys, like who are watching this, like if you want to join this game, just go to Kahoot or it. So it's this the URL like kahoot.it. Like if you just go into this website, like it'll ask for a game pin. So Kahoot is like it's just a multiple choice question. So we'll give some riddles, and there'll be four options. Four options has its own signs. So a rectangle, circle, I guess, something like signs. So you just have to press the respective signs. So it's very simple. So we have 10 questions, and it's a kind of riddle. So it's not kind of technical. So it's just a kind of riddle questions. So you can just use this game pin 853714, and you can just copy you can just enter this pin here in this game pin, and you can just join. So I think yeah, two players, two speakers join the game. Okay, so I think we'll at least wait for I think 6 or 7 players maybe. So for each question we have 60 seconds. You can just pick up your options. And if you win, like as it said, you'll get a promo code. I think it's Angular, right, Siddharth? Udemy
Yeah,
Angular course. Udemy,
yeah.
right? Okay, 6 players. So let me
Let me just quickly share my screen. What? Yeah,
so you're sharing.
yeah. So this is the course that I'm talking about.
So let me add it to the stream. Just a second. I think I have to one share. Yeah, now you can share your screen.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the course.
Okay, Angular 10 masterclass. So it has from the beginners of Angular, like basics of Angular.
Yep. Um, I'll just
Okay.
probably check out the course content. So I go quite in depth about a lot of these different topics. Like, let's say, for example, in case of components, I uh, basically go in depth, and I'm also working on updating the course. So uh, I've done that till section 4, but I'll try to be more comprehensive in terms of the concepts that I teach, and hopefully this course might help you out if you are preparing for for an interview or something. And yeah, so a lot of major
Okay.
updates uh, on the go. So I try to keep
Okay,
this up
that's
to
good.
date. So
Siddharth.
yeah,
Okay, okay.
enough promoting it, I guess. Yeah,
It's fine. It's just good content to promote it. Okay, I think 7 players has
it's,
joined. Okay, I think we can start the game. So let me start it. Okay, so you have 10 questions. Okay, so the first question is, what can you hold without touching it at all? So what can you hold without touching it at all? So we have 4 options. You can just click the symbols in the screen, like you'll get symbols, and you can just press the respective symbol. So we have 4 options: so conversation, error handling, phone call, and air. I think I'm sharing my screen, right?
yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I am able to see it, but I'm in the I'm in the StreamYard thing. So
So, um, so we got 4 answers. 5, 6. Okay, I think time's up. Okay. The conversation, error handling. Okay, 3 answered error handling and 3 answered conversation. So we'll see the point tables. Siddharth 945.
yay!
Udhay. Okay, we'll go for the next question. Um, Second one is, I am an odd number. Take away 1 letter and I become even. So the options are 9, 7, 1, and 5. Okay, till 0 answers. I think it due to live stream it takes some delay, I guess. 4, 5 answers.
This was a tricky one.
The questions are actually taken by Sundaram.
Ah, okay.
8 answers. Okay. Okay, the answer is 7. So if you remove the first letter yes, so it's actually even. So 5 answers. So let me go to next. Okay, still Siddharth remains the top. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. So what gets sharper the more you use it? The options are iron rod, knife, pencil, and your brain. So we have 4 options. Two answers. Also check YouTube if there are any comments. Okay, we have 8 answers. Okay, it's done. Okay. Yeah, your brain is the right answer. Um, okay, so still see that is the top. So we'll go to the next question. So what travels the world while stuck in one spot? Virus, airplane, a stamp, ship. So what travels the world while stuck in one spot? I think we have also audio. You're hearing some music, Siddharth?
Nope.
Okay, don't come up in the stream, I guess.
This have been the case for the past NG Girls events as well for us.
Okay, okay, stamps the right answer. Oh, virus. Okay, okay,
Why
so the
is stamp the right answer and virus is not?
virus is it's not in one spot, right? It keeps on spreading from one person to other, but
Ah, okay.
a stamp like remains in a one spot wherever it goes. Okay, it's now he's in the lead. So we'll go to the next question. The next question is what has a neck but no head? So the options are bottle, worm, snake, and a fish. So what has a neck but no head? We have two answers, 3, 6, 7. Okay, 7. Okay, one has form. Okay, the correct answer is a bottle. We'll see the points. Okay, I'll just in the top. So we'll go to the next question. So what has one eye but can't see anything at all? So the options are bats, needle, flies, sunglass. So this is the sixth question. Still we have 4 questions left.
My phone is about to discharge.
We have 7 answers. Okay. Yeah, needle is the right answer. Everyone answered right actually. Okay. So it's still in the top. So we'll go to the next question. So this is the seventh question. So what can be broken but is never held? So what can be broken but is never held? Glass, promise, bottle, and plastic.
This was deep.
We were running out of questions. Okay, yeah, promise. Okay, one person said glass. That's fine. So the correct answer is promise. So we'll go to the next. So it's yeah remains the top. The next question is what breaks and never falls, and what falls and never breaks. This is kind of easy, I guess. So we have 4 options. So what breaks and never falls, and what falls and never breaks. I have 2 answers. Seven. We got 7 answers. Okay. Yeah, day breaks and the night falls. So the right question is day breaks and night falls. So we have 5 correct answers. We'll see the points table. Okay, so that goes to the top. So we'll go to the next question. So still we have 2 questions left. So Arch, all the best. So what goes up and down but always remains in the same place? So the options are aeroplane, rocket, insect, stairs. So what goes up and down but always remains in the same place? Yeah, stairs is the right answer. So we got 7 right answers for it. Okay, still Sid went to the top. So the last question. So if you sit a cup on the table facing south while you are on the north side of the table, on which side is the cup's hand? So I think it's a kind of big question. Like take your time. So if you sit a cup on the table facing south while you are on the north side of the table, on which side is the cup's hand? So we have 4 options: east side, outside, west side, and north side. Okay, we got 7 answers. Okay, time's up. Yeah, the answer is outside. So we got 3 right answers for it. Yeah, so we'll see the got yeah, third place goes to Arts. Second one is Raj. First one is Siddharth, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so now who gets the that Udemy course thing?
Raj and Arjun, I guess. What would I do of my own course?
Okay, so
do
I
you
think,
have do you have any ng-keralam hoodie or something for me?
so currently, actually, we don't have any hoodies. Like probably in the future, if you're going to print any hoodies, like we'll just give it for the existing speakers.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Raj and us, like you can probably share your Twitter handles in your chat, maybe. So we'll get the course, maybe the token from Sid, and we'll share you in the Twitter. Like you can just post your Twitter handle in your comments. I think hopefully you enjoyed it, guys. So it's just a kind of riddle question. So thanks, Sundaram, for your questions.
Yeah, some of them were like,
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So I think we'll go to the next session then. So Raj and Raj, so you can just post your Twitter handle, so I can reach out to you once after the session over. So you can just post your Twitter handle in the comments. So you'll get a Udemy course link. Maybe you can share it with your friends, or you also can just go through that course. I think it will be very useful for you. Okay, so we'll see next session. So the next session is by Udhay. So he'll be sharing his thoughts on like how we can preload. So what are the preloading strategies for Angular modules? So over to you, Uday. Like you can start off with your session.
Sure, Sugas.
Yeah.
Thank you, ng-keralam team, for this opportunity. And the Ivy session by Sid was great. So he shared his knowledge on Ivy from different perspective. So I'm going to talk about preloading strategies in Angular modules. So let me share my screen quickly. Okay, hope you are able to see my screen.
Yeah. Yes, Uday.
Yeah. Okay. So the topic of discussion today is going to be how we can preload Angular modules based on different strategies, right? So we may be having different strategies according to our organization. So some organization may say we want to preload this product modules before user visits product page, or some companies or some organizations may say we need to preload product modules as well as billing module, Angular module, so that user can easily navigate to those pages without waiting, right? So we have different strategies here. I just put all those strategies in one place. So I'm just going to quickly walk through that with a simple example. So this is the agenda I have today. I will start with what is single module Angular app, and then I will move on to multi-module Angular app, and then we can decide whether to go with single module or multi-module, or we need to load those modules based on lazy loading, right? So that will give you a couple of ideas like how you can load the modules, but that is not going to help at all when it comes to implementing different strategies. So we need to dive into different strategies, like how we can preload those modules. So I have 4 different strategies here. There are more strategies available on internet. You can just Google it. But I picked these 4 strategies, which are considered to be kind of more popular and easy to implement, right? So this is what the agenda I have for today. And by the way, I'm Udhay. I'm a full stack engineer working here in US. And I host Angular online meetup events, as well as I host meetup events here in the place where I live. And I also do speak in Angular events conducted by other interested folks. And I also do write my articles on angularive.com. So when you get a chance, take a look. And I'm available on Twitter, GitHub, YouTube, and LinkedIn at the handle @AskUdhay. Right. So just in case if you want to connect with me, just head over to Twitter and search for Ask Udhay and connect with me. And I share useful tweets on Angular, and sometimes I share programming memes as well. Right. Okay, so let's move on to a single module Angular app. So we know about the single module Angular app very much, right? So when you begin with Angular learning, you should have created a simple Angular app, say ng-new hello world or whatever. So that will create a simple Angular app for you. And that Angular app will have single module in it and a single component in it. And in addition to that, you can add pipe directives or whatever you want, right? But that app is going to have a single module, basically. And we call it as app.module.ts, right? So we call it as app module, and basically it resides within app.module.ts. And single module Angular app is kind of a way more than what to say. You have your web application that has only one page or two page. Say for example, your portfolio app. If you want to display something on your portfolio, you are going to have like two pages, right? One is for displaying all your projects, what you created, and the other page is going to be about yourself, like who you are, what you are doing. So in that case, when you have like two pages, like single module is enough, right? You don't have to create multiple modules there. Like single module is enough there, and you can put two pages over there and build your application and deploy it. So that will solve your problem. But what happens when we are going to have multiple operations or multiple actions need to be performed in our web application? So what we can do? So like single module cannot help in that case. So we need to create multi-module Angular app in that case, right? So what is multi-module Angular app? So we will end up creating multiple modules in Angular in addition to the app module that was created using ng-new command. So we will be creating multiple modules, and we put those multiple modules in different places within your app, like however you want, whatever way you want to call it, and you just bundle that and deploy it in the server, right? So the example which I took here is a simple e-commerce web application, say Amazon or Flipkart or whatever, right? So those applications, if they are implemented with Angular or some other framework, so how that would look like? So the main module is going to be the root module. The root module is going to have the control with all the other submodules. So the main module is kind of the entry point for our application, and it's going to route the users to different modules based on the user's action. Like if user wants to go to products page, user will be routed to product module. If users wants to go and see his past orders, the root module will route user to orders module, right? So we have like 5 different modules here, like I would say like submodules: home, products, cart, payment, and orders. So these 5 modules are custom modules which I built on top of my existing Angular app module. And it's my job to define how these modules to be loaded and in whatever way I want to call it, right? So we have different approaches here. So one thing is we can implement lazy loading here. So lazy loading helps with loading the module as user routes to the specific link. As I said, if user wants to see what are the products are there in his cart, he has to go to the cart page, like something.com or some amazon.com or whatever /cart is going to take user to cart module. So in cart module, it's going to paint the components related to cart module, right? So this is how we can actually do the lazy loading stuff. So I just put it in the pictorial way here. So let me hide this so that you can see my screen. Yeah. So this is my store called someonlinestore.com, something similar to Amazon.com, right? And this onlinestore.com is having 5 different modules: home, products, cart, payment, and orders. And all these modules are going to have a different routes. Say, for example, if I access someonlinestore.com/home, it's going to route me to home module. If I access someonlinestore.com/billing, it's going to route me to the payment module, right? So this is how the lazy loading works. And implementing lazy loading in Angular is super easy. You don't have to do a complex configuration. You don't have to install something new. All will be taken care by Angular itself. But the only thing is you need to let know Angular in however way you want to create your lazy module. I mean, lazy loaded module, right? So the command which you need to use basically to create lazy loading module is ng-generate module. Your module ng is a keyword, generate is the keyword again, or you can use g as well. And module is going to let know Angular like what you want to create, module or pipe or component or whatever. In this case, I'm going to create module, and the module name. Following module, you need to give the module name. The module name here is payment. I want to create a payment module, and this payment module should have the routing set as billing, right? When I access /billing, it's going to call a payment module for me, right? And this is going to be attached, or this is going to be bundled with my app module. So under root module, I'm creating a new module called payment module, and this payment module is going to have the route called /billing. Okay, so this command will create a module for you, and also it will configure the routing for you. So just use this command wherever needed when you want to create a lazy loaded module. And one thing you need to make sure is you need to you need to have your project set up with routing. And how you can do that is whenever you create a new project, like using ng-new command, just add this option --routing. This will add a app.routing.ts for you, and this routing file will have the information like which route is going to call which module, right? So I have created one module called payment here, and it's going to have the route called billing, and it's going to be under the root module. All set. And as I already told you, this is what the configuration will look like in routing.ts, right? So if you look at the routing.ts, it will have this configuration set, like whenever user visits the path /billing, it's going to lazy load the module called payment module, right? And it's going to bootstrap that module whenever user visits /billing. Okay, simple as that. So if you want to have another module set up here, say for example orders module, the configuration is going to look like path:orders, load children, / your order folder /order.module. Like that, you can have n number of modules created within your app. Okay, not just that, all the modules what I'm showing here are created under the root module, right? So you can also create your module right under the sub module, right? There will be a root module, following that a sub module, and following that another sub module. So you can even have that hierarchy set up in your application. It's up to you. So as I already told you, whenever you visit https://someonlinestore.com/billing, it's going to load this payment module, right? Okay, so what is the drawback of this approach? So the drawback which I'm seeing here is when my payment module chunk size is going to be huge. Say it's going to be 1 MB, or sometimes it can be even 5 MB, right? It depends how much JavaScript code you put, how much images or other stuff that you want to put within your module. It's going to become that much big. So the drawback here I'm seeing is when my a payment module is huge, the chunk size is huge, it's going to take more time to load. So when my user visits /billing, like someonlinestore.com/billing, my user needs to wait for a couple seconds or sometimes couple minutes, depends on the network connectivity. So in that case, the payment module is going to be downloaded from the remote server, which is going to take a couple minutes or couple seconds, as I already told you, based on the network connectivity. So in that case, user needs to see some loading GIF, or he may see some blank page in that case. So he may get frustrated and he may go back to the previous page, or he may log out and just switch to another provider as well, right? So you are losing your user there in terms of your speed and page loading defects that you have in your web application. So lazy loading is a good practice, but again, it has some drawbacks. So it's going to take more time when your module size is huge to download that, right? So this is one of the drawback I see in lazy loading, even though it is a good practice. So how we can mitigate this in our Angular applications? How we can totally remove this pitfall that we have in lazy loading? So that's where preloading strategy comes into picture. And I have 4 different preloading strategies here. The first one is all. The second one is selective. The third one is network based, like what network user is connected with, like 4G, 3G, or 2G. And the fourth one is quick link strategy, right? So this is from actually Minko. He created this strategy, and he's having it as a library available in GitHub. Okay, I just used this ngx quick link as the last strategy here. Okay, let's go through each strategy in detail. But before that, I just want to show you the sample application that I created and the one which I'm going to demo it to you, right? So I took the example here as Pokemon application, right? I'm going to call it as Pokemon World. So this application is running in my local under the port 4200. And I have created this application using Angular material. And I have the 3 menus here: home, Pokemon, and about. Okay, I have three pages basically. And in the Pokemon page, when I click on this particular Pokemon character, it's going to take me to the stats about that particular Pokemon character, right? If I click this link, view all Pokemons, it will take me back to the Pokemon page. And if you look at the routing here in the address bar, if you look at the paths, when I click on Pokemon, you can see the route got changed to /Pokemon. And similarly, when I click on the respective Pokemon character, you can see the route got changed to the respective Pokemon character ID, right? And it loads the Pokemon characters, right? And this particular application, which is running on my mission, is not having any strategy set up yet. It is just using lazy loading. Okay, so to just see whether it is using lazy loading, we can just inspect the network activity for this application and just make sure how that works. Okay, so just go to inspect. Hope you are able to see my screen. Let me know if you have any issues. Okay, I'm in the network tab. Just watch my network activity here. When I click on this Pokemon link, it actually loads Pokemon module for me. That's how lazy loading works, right? When I access this Pokemon page, which is /Pokemon, it downloads the Pokemon module chunk, and on top of that, it does all the component painting and reloading the images, all those stuff. So similarly, let me clear this network activity. When I click on this particular Pokemon character, it's going to load the Pokemon stats module, which is going to be another module to display or to paint the details of Pokemon, which I clicked. Okay, so I have 2 different modules. One is Pokemon, the other one is Pokemon stats. And not just that, I have one more module called about module. When I click on about link, it's going to load about page for me. And if you see here in the network activity, you can see about module got loaded. Okay, so this is how lazy loading works. So I have good internet connectivity here. I'm connected with 4G here, and my module size is very small. Okay, let us dig into the module size first. So if I go to the network connectivity, network tab, if I click on Pokemon, yeah, it will not reload that again because the Pokemon module is already loaded. So what I do, I will just clear this page so that all the cache will be cleared. And it reloaded Pokemon module for me. And the size of Pokemon module is just 388 KB. Okay, sorry, 368 KB. Sorry, not even 368. It's 64, right? It's 64 KB, which is nothing, right? If you have internet connectivity like even 2 MB per second, right? Even if you have 2 MB per second internet, very low bandwidth, so it will load this module, no issues. Assume if your module is of size like 2 MB, it's going to take 1 second to download that module, right? If your module is going to be like 8 MB size, and if you have 2 MB per second internet, it's going to take 4 seconds to download that module. So your user has to wait for 4 seconds in order to load that module, right? So in that case, lazy loading will not help. It's not going to help anyway to the user to load this module because it is going to make the user wait for 4 seconds to download that module, right? So that's the disadvantage we have with lazy loading. That's why we are going with preloading strategies. I hope you are clear with what is lazy loading and why we are going with preloading strategy, right? If you have any question, let me know on the YouTube comment section. And yeah, so this is what my application look like. Let me go through the modules as well. So I have already told you the root module is app.module.ts. And all my routing configuration goes within to routing.module.ts. And you can see it has configuration like for home/home, it's going to call home module. For about, it's going to call about module, and respectively for Pokemon and Pokemon stats. And also we have different modules like home module. You can see home.module.ts, and Pokemon module to list the list of Pokemons, and Pokemon stats for displaying the Pokemon stats, and about module for displaying the Pokemon, for displaying the about detail of my app, right? Okay, and so that's it. Okay, so that's a clear picture of what we are trying to do, right? So I will share this code anyway on GitHub, and if you have any question on top of that, like if you want to implement a different strategy, or if you want to go with like different approach, you can reach me out on Twitter at Ask Udhay handle. Okay, oh, I forgot to tweet this. Okay, let me do it now. Yeah, you can reach out me here on at Twitter at Ask Udhay. You can connect with me there. Okay. So coming back, it's time to dig into the Angular preloading strategies, right? So even though we are using lazy loading approach here, I just want to preload all the modules ahead. Upfront, I want to load the modules, irrespective of the different strategies like network and other stuff. I want to load all the modules just as soon as the page was visited by my user. As soon as my domain name .com is accessed, I want to preload all the modules, irrespective of whether user is going to visit the respective route, or based on network, or based on some other strategy. I just want to load all the modules, right? So this approach will be very helpful whenever you feel like, okay, your modules are not going to be of bigger size, and the user who are using your application are going to have good internet connectivity, right? In that case, you can use this approach, and this is going to load all the modules upfront. So to do that, you need to do a couple of configurations. So we have to set up the preloading strategy option in our routes. In the router module, you need to set you want to preload all the modules under preloading strategy. Okay, so let me pull the code for preloading all strategy. Right. So I have put different different branches for each preloading strategy, and the preloading strategy which I need to download now is preload all. So let me check out preload all code, and let me go to the app.routing module.ts, and I will show you how the configuration got changed here. Right. So previously we didn't have this option called preloading strategy, preload all modules, and now we are going to add this piece of option, and which is going to let know Angular that I want to load all the modules irrespective of lazy loading approach. So whenever user is going to visit some onlinestore.com, it's going to download all the modules available for that application, irrespective of internet connectivity or whatever, right? So that's the first approach we have. So it will preload all the modules. So let me go and build this project once again and serve it on the port number 4200 and see how that works. Okay. So I just restarted this app by running the command ng-serve. It's building the app. Okay, so the app is ready. I'm going to access this from incognito window 4200, and before that I need to open my network tab just to see whether all whether all modules are getting loaded. So when I access this page, my application through localhost :4200, you can see all the modules got loaded here. So the first thing you will see here is about module got loaded, preloaded, and Pokemon module got preloaded, and Pokemon stats module as well as got preloaded here, because we have provided the option like I want to preload all the modules by adding this preloading strategy within my router module.forRoute method. Okay, and this preloading strategy is available. This preloading modules is available within @Angular/router package. Okay, so this is the first strategy we have in our discussion today, and let's move on to the second preloading strategy. So once again, I will walk you through why we are going with this preloading strategy all. So whenever you feel like your modules are not going to be of bigger chunk size and your users are going to have good internet connection, you just preload all the modules, right? So that even when user is going to route through that particular link or not, or that path or not, it's going to be available for the user, right? So this is the first approach we have, which is preloading strategy all. And the next one is preloading strategy selective. Say, for example, you feel like your products module is always visited by your user, right? So your user is always visiting your products module, and you have some stats that was taken using your Adobe Analytics or whatever. And that says like your users are always visiting the products page as soon as they enter into the web application. In that case, what you can do, you can just preload products module in the products page, so that whenever user visits the products page, it's not going to make the user to wait to download the products module. Rather, it will take it from your browser cache, right? So that's the approach we have here. And you can let know your Angular application whether you want to preload one module or more than one module, okay? So basically what we need to do here is you need to let know your Angular application that you want to preload the particular module by adding this option preload : true. Okay. And you can add this along with the module that you want to load within your router configuration. Okay, in this case, I want to preload this about module. Sorry, not about module, this home module. So I decided to have this preload option set as true for home module, right? Similarly, for this about module, I don't want to load it upfront, so I specified the value as false. So same thing we can put it here for the other modules. So let me go and check out the preloading selective strategy. I'm going to check out the branch called preload selective. And the one thing that we have here is we have this configuration set like preload true or preload false for the respective modules. In this case, a home module will be preloaded because the preload is set to true. And Pokemon module is also going to be preloaded because the preload is set to true here. And no other configuration you need to do here. And the only thing is we need to specify your selective preload strategy here. You need to write your own strategy code, like how you want to load it. In the previous discussion, we had preload strategy as all, which is by default available in Angular. But the selective preloading strategy is not available by default in Angular. So you need to write piece of code to handle the selective preloading strategy. So I have this preloading strategy written as a class, and it is available within my application. Okay, and it will be injected as a service whenever the routing configuration begins in my application. So this selective preloading strategy is actually implements the interface preloading strategy here, and this interface preloading strategy has a method called load. Okay, this method is called load, and you need to write your piece of code to let know whether this particular module needs to be loaded, preloaded or not. So when the value that comes as a parameter to this is true, in that case it will load this module. Otherwise it will not preload that module. Okay, so it is going to check the value of your preload JSON object. If it is going to be true, it's going to load that module. Otherwise, it is not going to preload that module, right? So you need to create this service class with preloading strategy interface implementation, and also with the little piece of code that goes within the load method. So that's it. Let's see. Let's go through once again our configuration, like what are the modules are going to be preloaded here. Home module and Pokemon module are going to be preloaded. So let me rebuild my application once again. So I am serving my application, and it's going to be listened on port number 4200. So let me close this browser and open a fresh private browser. Okay, and yeah, the application is already running. Before that, I will just load my network tab. I'm going to access my application, localhost :4200. All set. And now, if you see, the home module should be preloaded. Instead of preloaded, I should say home module is the first bootstrap module. So it won't show in the network activity because it is not going to be lazy loaded anyway. It is going to be invoked as a first thing as soon as you load this module. That's why you won't see it in the network activity. But you will see this Pokemon module in the network activity because we are preloading this module, right? And Pokemon stats and about module, we are not preloading here. That's why you don't see that here. Only you will see Pokemon module got preloaded here. So when I let me clear this network activity, and when I click on this Pokemon link, it's going to load a list of Pokemons, and it's getting loaded based on my Pokemon module. But as per the lazy loading approach, what we discussed some time back, whenever I visit the path, it's going to load the respective module lazily, right? But in this case, it is not going to load that because it was preloaded already. So that's why you won't see that Pokemon module getting downloaded once again because it was already downloaded and available in my browser cache. Okay. And if I visit my respective Pokemon here, okay, so my favorite Pokemon is Pikachu. So when I click on this, it is going to load my Pokemon stats module here and the respective information, right? Similarly, when I go to the About page, it's going to load my About module. Okay, because About module and Pokemon stats module was not preloaded, it's actually still behaving like a lazy loaded module. Hope you got the difference between preloading all and preloading a selective approach here. And you may ask, like, where exactly you can use preloading strategies selective? Yeah, as I already told you, if you are if just identify which page of your application is getting high traffic, right? So just make sure those pages module are getting preloaded so that user don't have to wait for that module needs to be downloaded, right? So that module chunk will be preloaded as soon as user visits the page for first time, and it will be available in the browser cache. Okay. So that's all about preloading strategy selective. If you still have any question on this, please post your question on YouTube live comments. I will answer at the end of the session. And let's move on to the next approach, which is based on network connection. So let me complete these two modules within like 5 to 10 minutes. Actually, we are running out of the time. Okay, so coming to network connection based, say, for example, you know that your users are from different zones. Say so you have some users, they are from specific zones where the internet connectivity is intermittent, or sometimes even it is very slow. So in that case, you need to decide whether those modules need to be preloaded or not. And if you have your users who are from high-tech cities and they have a super fast internet, and in that case, you can just let know your Angular, hey, go and just download the Angular preload the modules, because user is having 4G or 5G connectivity, right? So you just decide, you just code your Angular app in such a way that whether you want to preload that module based on the 2G connection or 3G or 4G or 5G, or even based on the Wi-Fi internet connectivity. Okay, that all we have in the home and office, right? So again, we need to write some piece of code to decide that. And this network connectivity is not part of Angular by default. So you need to write a code to check what is the network connectivity your user is having. Based on that, you need to decide whether to apply the preloading strategy or not. So in this case, I'm going to apply the preloading strategy, like preload : true, which means it will preload my modules if user is going to have a good internet connectivity. Say, for example, if user is having 3G internet connectivity, it's going to preload all the modules. If user is not having 3G, if user is having 2G instead, it's not going to preload all those modules, right? And I need to write the piece of code within my service class by implementing the interface preloading strategy, something like this. Okay. And the strategy which I name here is network preloading strategy. You can name it whatever you want, right? You can just name it like Wi-Fi preloading strategy or whatever. This is a custom name. And this network preloading strategy implements the interface preloading strategy. And this preloading strategy interface has a method that needs to be implemented, which is called load method. And this load method is going to call a method called has good network connection. And that method is available within my service class. And it's going to return true or false based on the internet connectivity my user is having or possessing, right? So if user is having 2G or 3G, I just want to avoid that. I just want to avoid the preloading, so that I will return the Boolean value as false, which means it will not preload those modules. If user is having other than 2G or 3G, that means if user is having 4G, 5G, or good Wi-Fi internet connectivity, it's going to preload those modules. So in that case, it's going to check whether user is having internet connectivity as 2G or 3G. If user is not having either one of them, it's going to return true. And when it is true, it is going to load the module. When it is false, it is not going to load the module. Simple as that, right? So I'll just go and check out the code for my preloading strategy based on internet connectivity. So I just checked out the branch called preload network based. And this is a piece of code I have here. And I just going to use the preloading strategy called network preloading strategy, which is my custom strategy, by the way. And it's going to preload the modules basically, right? So in this case, it is not having any values like preload true or preload false, right? Previously we had this preload true, preload false. Where is that? Here in the previous example, right? But in the code what I'm showing now, it's not having that, because I just want to write that, and I just want to make it running it for you. Okay. So we need to add this data JSON object just after your module somewhere like here. Okay. I just want to load this about module based on my internet connectivity. Okay. This data needs to be passed to my preloading strategy class. I mean network. It's a service class, and it is going to take the value as okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, I haven't implemented that data because yeah, you can still implement that. So that's what I was about to say. So in the preloading strategy, what I was showing here, right? Network strategy, it is not taking any value here. But in spite of that, if you want to pass any value, say suppose you may have a functionality like, even though user is having good internet connectivity, you don't want to load that module. You got it what I'm saying? Say for example, if user is having 4G internet connectivity, but in spite of that, you don't want to load that module. In that case, you can pass something like preload true or false here. Okay. So what this will do is, even though user is having a 4G connection or 5G connection, on top of that, it is going to check whether this preload value is false or true. If it is false, it is not going to preload that module. So you can apply this strategy whenever you have your pages that is not at all having any traffic, right? About page will not have that much traffic basically, right? In e-commerce applications. So in that case, you can specify like preload as false for such modules. But I don't have that implementation here, but you can try it out. So what this basically is going to do is just check the connectivity, and based on that, it is going to return true or false. So let me load this module or load this application from my incognito browser again. And I'm going to mimic 3G internet connectivity. Okay. So, but before that, I just want to I just want to reload my page as such with my home internet connection, which is Wi-Fi connection. So if you see here, all my modules got downloaded, like about module, Pokemon module, and Pokemon stats module. All these modules got preloaded here because I'm having a good internet connection here, right? So what happens if I am going to have a slow internet connection? So I'm going to mimic that, something like I just want to have 3G internet connection. Say suppose I'm connected to 3G internet. So how I can mimic is go to network, and from here choose slow 3G. Okay, I'm going to choose a slow 3G, and I'm going to hit enter here. So it's actually mimicking 3G connection. I mean slow 3G connection. I think it's a 2G, I believe. And that's why you are seeing it's loading very slowly here. And since it is having a slow 3G connection, you won't see my other modules got preloaded here, right? So because I have written a code such a way that if I have 3G or 2G internet connectivity, I should not preload any of the modules, right? So that's why no modules got preloaded here, and you can see only the home module got loaded. Even home module is taking more time, right? So see, if you are having a slow 2G connection, so this is the case. So this is how it was the internet like 10 years back. So when we were using Nokia mobile phones, right? So but we are using super fast internet now. Okay, I think it's going to take more time because we are mimicking a slow 2G connection. Sometimes it may even time out. Even for loading something from my local host, it is taking too much time, right? Okay, so this is how the network preloading strategy works. The network preloading strategy, you specify whether you want to preload all the modules based on your internet connectivity, like 2G or 3G or 4G or whatever. Okay, and you can check that internet connectivity by using your connection type. You can get that using your connection dot effective type. Okay, you can do that with the navigator dot connection. And the connection what I have here is (4G). Even though I have 4G, I just mimicked 2G in my case, right? So network connection dot effective type is going to give me the value, like whether it is 4G or 3G or 2G. The internet connectivity what I have in my home is 4G, right? So that's why it is showing as 4G. But for our sake of conversation, I just mimicked the 2G here, right? So you can see. Okay, so you can see all these modules got preloaded because whenever I run this command, it changed my internet connectivity to 4G by default. So that's the reason. Okay. So coming to the next strategy, what we have here is quick link strategy, and this quick link strategy is from Minco. Okay, it's from Minco. So you know about Minco Getcho, right? Is part of Google's Angular team. He has this strategy created and have it in the GitHub. So what basically we need to do here is you just need to install this module, the specific module, and you need to import it in your application. Okay, let me check out this code. Preload quick links. And one thing we need to do is, since we are installing a new module, we need to restart the app. Okay, let's go back to the application, app.module.ts. So in app.module.ts, you can see we are having the list of components and other stuffs here. And we don't have that specific quick links module here. I'll tell you where exactly we are using that. So that quick links module is actually used within our app.routing.module.ts. Okay, I use this. Okay, just a minute. Okay, actually what I did some changes for the previous one, network strategy. So that it's stopping me from checking out the quick link strategy code. So I just checked out the quick link strategy code and going to serve that on server. Okay, coming back here, go back to the app module. And we can see we are using quick link module here in imports. And not just that, it just let know my Angular application that I want to use quick link strategy here. But before that, we need to know what this quick link strategy is, right? So the documentation clearly says that it is going to load all the modules specific to the router links that is available within the viewport. So within the viewport, that is within the page, if you have any router links, and if those router links are going to have the lazy loaded modules, those lazy loaded modules will be preloaded. So that's what this quick link strategy is going to do, right? And in our case, the home page, the home module is going to have our Pokemon page, right? This Pokemon page is going to have the list of 3 modules, like About module, Pokemon stats, as well as Pokemon module. So all these 3 modules are going to be preloaded for me. Okay. So I'm getting some error here because I need to install this quick links module first. So not just adding it in app.module.ts is enough. We need to install that module as well, right? Because it got added into package.json as a dependency. So I need to install that. I did that. So I'm going to serve it once again. And I'm going to show this demo again on incognito browser. And open the network tab. And come back here. Yeah, it's still building the application. All set. So I'm going to hit enter in the address bar to download my application. And I'm not going to mimic any network connectivity here. So you can see it preloaded a Pokemon module as well as About module, right? All set. Because I have 2 links here, router links, one for Pokemon and one for About. So those 2 router links available within my viewport, that is within my page. So quick link strategy will just inspects through, or it will just scans through the entire page to identify the list of router links. And it will check what those router links are mapped with in terms of lazy loaded modules. And it will just preload those lazy loaded modules. So that's what happened here. It preloaded Pokemon module as well as About module, right? So when I visit this About link, it's not going to load About module again because it was preloaded already. Okay. Hope you got some quick idea on how these strategies works. So that's all I have. So you can find my code with the different branches under GitHub, and the app is already running on my Firebase server. I'll just ping this code. Ping this link to Suhas. You can just put it on the comments. Okay. So this is the app running on my Firebase. And I used Pokemon API. I need to say about that API. And just for courtesy purpose, I need to thank them. Okay. So I'm using a Pokemon Poke API basically to get the list of Pokemon details, stats, and other stuff. So if you want to implement Poke API in your different Angular applications or React or whatever, you can use this API. It's straightforward. It just gets me the list of Pokemons, stats, images, whatever we want related to Pokemon. We can build a Pokemon app around this app. So for dev purpose, I think you can make multiple calls, but for production ready, I don't think so. You need to check the documentation. Okay, and I will also share this. I'll also share this deck with Sundaram and Suhas. So you can just share it with participants or audience. And in the last slide, you will see, you will find the link to my app, my Twitter, and my previous talks you can find under askudhay.com. And you can also find link to my code here. Okay. And that's all I have. Do you have any question? Let me stop my screen sharing.
Yeah, I think we have questions. So we have questions from Arjun. So he's asking like, I have been using PWA schematic and the service worker prefetch the JS chunks. Would you recommend using a preloading strategy over the service worker?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arjun. So I think if you put your service worker piece of code as a module, yes, you can do it. You can preload those modules, right? But if your service worker is going to independently load the stuffs independently, in the sense, say for example, based on user's action or based on time interval for every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, if you are going to fetch something from the remote server based on your service worker, I think preloading strategy will not work in that case, because service worker is totally a different paradigm in Angular. I mean, in web world, and preloading strategy is totally a different thing within Angular. So we cannot combine both together. So we should not interfere with the interfere with the service worker implementation in terms of preloading strategy. So preloading strategy is basically to download the modules that are going to be used in my web browsers, right? But just in case, if you want to load your service code piece of code, that is the first service worker code that you want to load in terms of module, you can do that with the help of preloading strategy. But once after that, it is not a good idea to download your service worker stuff using preloading strategy.
Okay, so the next question is, have you tried using guest.js? Any pointers on that will be helpful.
No, I haven't used that. Maybe I'll check that and let you know on Twitter or some other way, however I can connect with you.
That's fine. And Federico, okay, he's saying like, you forgot to mention the lib npm to have to module responsible. Like, I'm not sure what he's saying, but do you have any idea?
Oh yeah,
Udhay?
So yeah, actually I forgot to install the quick links module.
Okay.
I forgot to do npm install, so that's why I was getting the error. I did that. I think he was talking about that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Federico, for noting it. So we have a question from Raj Shekhar. In my project store, directives, pipes, model services are used between different modules, so they are put in project's root location in their respective folder. So main.js easily increases to 1 MB plus. This makes initial load very slow. How to optimize the landing page to load faster?
Okay, so what I would say, I mean, it's like you need to choose one option here. So in one way, the practice what you are following is good. So you identified all the common piece like pipe directives that you are going to use across the different modules, and you just put it as a single shared module, right? That is a good thing. But again, when you need to download that shared module as a preloading based on preloading strategy, it's going to take some time. Like for 1 MB, obviously it's going to take like couple seconds, like 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So this is kind of a trade-off, if you ask me. If you ask me what I will do, I will just separate this shared module piece, and I will put that pipe and whatever code within the separate modules, and I will load those separate modules in terms of preloading strategy. So it's again a trade-off. Either you need to satisfy removing the redundancy of code, or you need to go with a preloading strategy. So it's kind of a tie between these two. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all the questions today.
Okay.
Yeah, so Siddharth is mentioning amazing session.
Yeah. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you so much. And your session was awesome in terms of Ivy.
We're unable to hear you, Sid.
I think he's muted.
No, actually. No, Siddharth. We cannot able to hear you. Okay.
I'm audible.
I think. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Now
think
it's
you are
fine.
audible now.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much, Sugas, for this opportunity, and Sundaram as well.
yeah.
Thank you.
Suhas and
So Raj,
Sundaram, thank you so much.
yeah, thanks.
This
Actually, thank you.
was
Thanks to both of you, like accepting the invite and sharing your thoughts on
anytime.
Angular thing.
Anytime.
Yeah. And also thanks Sid for sharing the Udemy course link. And
Anytime.
so
Yeah.
uh, uh, yeah, very helpful, I guess. And yeah, Rajsekhar is saying it was a great informative session. Thanks everyone. Yeah, thanks Rajsekhar.
Thank
So
you,
we'll
Raj.
yeah, so we have an idea of conducting this event every month. So we'll have two sessions every month. Like you can just so it's focused on Angular. So you can just come to YouTube and you can just watch it. So you can also check out our Twitter page. Our Twitter handles ng_keralam. Um, I think yeah, ng_keralam. Like you can just go out and all the event updates we'll mention it in the Twitter. Yeah, I think we have come to an end, so we can wrap this up. So Sundaram, over to you.
Thank you, Suhas. So, thank you, Sid and Udhay, for sharing awesome piece of information. And the session was uh, really very useful for us all. And thanks everyone for your support joining us. And once again, thank you to the speakers and attendees. Bye, everyone. See you on the next event.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sid.
bye.
Bye.
Bye, Udhay. Thank you so much.